Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining. So over the next 40 minutes or so, we're going to do a client panel, which you see at a lot of these conferences, but we're going to try to do it in a bit of an unorthodox way. We are not going to have a moan session about the barriers between clients and agencies. We are going to set the tone for what I believe this whole conference should be. Now, this is a conference of forward-thinking leaders, startups that are disrupting the space, like-minded corporate researchers and insights professionals. But really everything we do as a business is to help the businesses that we support grow their top and bottom line. And I think too often we come to these events and we get mired in the shiny new toys in the industries that we support, the new methodologies, but ultimately if it doesn't drive business results, it doesn't matter. So this is going to be an incredible 3 days. I mean, the Green Book team always curates a wonderful event, and we're all really excited to be here. But what we're going to try to get into this morning is a bit of a discussion of what's actually moving the needle in the businesses that these leaders support, and then open it up for the last 10 minutes or so to get you folks involved so that as a community we can start to grow. I'm sure you've seen some data points of the fact that our category is actually going in the wrong direction. I would like to see that change quickly. So thanks all for joining. What we're going to do is just kick it off, and each of the panelists is going to introduce themselves. I know they just introduced their title while I was getting water, but talk a bit about what they do in their organization and some of the trends that they see emerging, not in their insights department, but in the categories that they sell. You'll notice we have a pretty diverse set of industries that are up here. And I don't know if I probably missed my own introduction, but I manage a business called Zappy Store, which is a tech automation platform. So I'll be playing the moderator representing sort of the agency side of this discussion. But Michelle, why don't you take over and talk a little bit about your business?
Sure. Hopefully everybody knows Wrigley Gum Company, owned by Mars. So I work in the impulse business. And I would say for us, the biggest trends are more around in-store, since we are impulse. As you probably know, transactions are changing, the way in which people buy is changing. You know, the future of in-store, we see one day where you will be able to check out without ever talking to a human being. So we think a lot about how do we still keep people thinking about gum and candy when it's not something that you have to buy and it's normally not something that makes on the list. So I'd say shopper insights is becoming more and more important in my industry.
Yeah, I think at Clorox we're really looking for ways to continue pushing the innovation envelope, to keeping consumers really front and center and looking for new audiences and new ways to open up doors, because a lot of the categories we work in are pretty well saturated, so we have to keep thinking about what's the next step, how do we find that new audience, and how do we develop that new product that's going to speak to a different audience.
I mentioned in my intro that I work for Verizon Telematics, and just to set the record straight, not big Verizon. So not phones, but rather what the telematics area is driving is more Internet of Things, if you've heard of that. If you haven't, don't feel bad, you will. Think autonomous cars that drive themselves. It's coming. It's not coming too soon, but it is coming. And also, just in general, leveraging Verizon's 4G technology and their global networks to connect human beings with vehicles, whether they're fleet or your own automobile. Just as a for instance, if you all have ever heard of Hum, was one of our new product launches. You can go to a Verizon retail store and buy this little dongle device. That's a real word, dongle. I had to look it up. And you plug it into your OBD2 port where the emissions guy sticks his little thing to give all the ratings on your car. And instantly you're connected to safety, security, the health report on your car. If you're a parent of a teenage driver, you set speed alerts and boundary alerts and just really neat stuff. So when you hear telematics, think, I got a little scared when Brian approached me because he wanted me to talk about robotics. Not robotics necessarily, but drones, yes, in play as well.
So at a place like Viacom, we have a few different sectors of research teams. We have research teams that support the advertising sales group. We have research teams that support the development of our digital products, our digital presence. We have research teams that support the development of programming and the marketing of our programming. My focus is more on that last section research. And the big trend that is taking place in our industry, I guess is probably pretty familiar to all of us, is, well, there are two. One, the massive proliferation of providers of television content So actual content providers like Netflix and Amazon and so forth, who are getting into the original programming business, that increases the intensity of our challenge. And then secondly, the substantial migration of our consumers from consuming through distribution channels that are easily measured by us and monetized, meaning like cable, satellite, to distribution channels that are not so easily measured by us and monetized, like YouTube TV and so forth. So those are the two big trends that are facing our industry.
It's interesting because I think each of you are going through massive disruption in your own industry, which obviously we're seeing in the consumer insights space as well. So, I mean, this audience, roughly half of us work for the agency side of the community. The other half would be in the corporate space. And I think one of the things that's always intrigued me as somebody who's always been on the agency side is you get to know the client from the brief to the sign you send them something. And we're not, I don't know that McKinsey's in this room helping implement, but most of the agencies that support this community don't get into implementation. They make recommendations, and it's over to you folks. In a few words, I'd love for each of you to just talk a bit about how you specifically are selling in insights to your leadership teams. So not to the rest of your department or perhaps your boss, but actually the leadership team that are going out, making these M&A decisions, discussing what to do next, and informing the strategies for the business.
Well, so at Viacom, that actually has been a deep part of our heritage for a very long time. Our senior leadership is constantly looking to consumer insights to inform all their strategic decisions, and they rarely make a major decision of that nature, of any such nature, content or marketing or business development, without at least trying to have some sense of the potential consumer impact of whatever that decision is. So for us, it's actually it's not much of a challenge selling in the insights to the C-suite. We have open lanes of communication, and so it's sort of built into our DNA that there's an understanding that when there is a major issue facing us, that the company will first come to research and try to understand what the consumer perspective might be on whatever this particular issue is. We have fairly fluid lines of communication in our situation.
So Tom, quick build on that. You get an 80-page deck from somebody in this room that I'm sure is beautiful. What goes to the CMO and the CEO? What actually do they see? Something
far smaller than an 80-page deck. Our job is to take the mass of insights that we generate through whatever research we're doing and distill it down to something that is very sort of strategic and gets to the key points, as I guess is not uncommon in across our industries. Senior management has perhaps less patience for some of the intricacies of your methodology and your data than you might like. But having said that, they do have a healthy respect for what we're doing, and they do want to make sure they understand what we're doing. But yes, it is definitely what they ultimately see is a small but highly distilled and highly potent fraction of what you deliver to us as your clients.
Why don't you build on that?
So I think for us, we spend a lot of time talking about who's the actual decision maker and how do they make decisions. This seems like a small thing, but it makes such a big decision. If somebody uses their head versus their heart versus their gut, there's different ways they want to see the information. People who use their head want to see the data and bring along the journey. People who use their gut want to see like examples and mentors. So what we try to do is first understand who are we talking to, and then we take the data and turn that into a story that's going to resonate with them. And I think, well, I know we're not talking about like supplier versus company, but I know that the suppliers out there are often wondering, how can I be more strategic? How can I give better recommendations? Honestly, you're never going to know your business as well as we know it. The thing I find most helpful is if we could just sit and have a conversation when it's still in working draft form, talk about what is the 2 or 3 nuggets that's interesting, and then craft that into a story that's going to be resonating with whoever that decision maker is.
So are you saying we can all save a lot of staff resource if we just had a 30-minute call?
Yeah.
Cool.
So much time.
Nice. June, do you want to comment on this topic?
Sure. I'll comment on any topic here. Just building on what Tom said in the beginning, selling in insights, not an issue at all. trying to prioritize who we hear from when and how we condense that information and connect the dots is hugely important. And we do have the presentations, not so much as what we used to before. It's more often than not going to be done internally. So less and less often I would have a vendor partner come in and do the presentation. And sometimes that's a bitter pill to swallow. It feels like we're stealing your limelight in many cases. Having been on that side of the business, trust me when I say it actually benefits in many ways. It takes that whole research thing, the R word that's not really spoken as much anymore, instead drives into the action component and makes it that much more meaningful for everyone that's listening. And word gets out. Everyone knows who's done the work, and the partners are extremely valuable. We just have to do things a little bit differently, as I say, differently,
And I would add also, in our case, a lot of the times we're combining the insights that you deliver with some other data set or some other insight from some other source. So it's not the presentation of a single set of insights. It's often not the presentation of just what you as a supplier may have delivered to us.
Now you're stealing my thunder.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's what I was going to say. Absolutely. Just you mentioned that they can't really know our business and shouldn't better than we do. You all also may not know what other sources we have, and sometimes it's anecdotal. Sometimes it's a favorite testimony that someone on the leadership team likes to talk about over and over again, and it's up to us to have those insights and tie it all together for the biggest bang for the buck. And again, it just comes out so much better that way. It makes us all look informed, like we're looking across the businesses, across the brands and the customer types, no one in a silo.
So the next question I have is about the pace of things in the world today. I had a head of marketing at a big beverage company tell me recently, we used to build 4 films a year and spend millions on each, and now we build 4,000, and we've got a little bit of money, but we still need to make sense of it all. Oddly enough, last week I was networking with a bunch of folks who are in digital marketing and social media, and when I was asking questions about consumer insights, they said, yeah, they don't see generally speaking, our insights partners don't see our DMPs. They're not privy to this information. So a question and I'll start with you, Michelle, if you don't mind. How are you setting up your function to stay ahead of the business and to really help get out in front of trends in the consumer space versus sort of being more of an order-taking type function? And I imagine there's a bit of a balancing act between the two.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've long moved away from order taking, but what we tend to do is we tend to reflect our business partners. So in marketing and sales, we reorg as an entire business, probably every couple of years, to reorg to market trends, and then our team reorgs in order to support the way the business is running. I think the biggest noticeable difference, and Chris and I were talking about this morning, is in CPG at least, there's this move towards cutting down the amount of dollars we spend on research and also an expectation of having answers faster. And so it feels like we're being asked to do more with less, but actually we're just being asked to do things differently. So pretty much gone are the days of 6-8 week long quant research studies, and now it's how do we form big data analytics teams to be able to squeeze more out of what we have, which I'm going to talk about tomorrow with my friend Christy from Knowledge Hound. Come to our session. I told her I'd push that in. But I think Kristen, you should talk more about this. But it is about doing things differently, not doing more with less.
Yeah, I think we're trying to shift that conversation right now because I think there is this sort of notion that we're being asked to move faster, but also cut down our budgets. And I think that shift can be accomplished in sort of 3 different pillars that we've been kind of talking about internally. The first one is really using the data sets that we have in new ways. So that may mean mining old data and things like Knowledge Hound and having appropriate ways to look at things and answer questions that maybe their data set wasn't originally designed for. And then the second way is having always-on sources, so things like online listening, but other kinds of tools that we can dip into those data streams whenever we need them, and it's not a one-and-done study. And then finally, the last thing is sort of agile tools. So the studies that allow us to do those fast, iterative learning rather than a big, giant foundational study, similar to what you were saying about the content development. Instead of doing 4 giant studies each year, we really need to be doing 50 really tiny ones that answer questions and that we keep iterating on. So all of those different kind of tools, those 3 pillars are really how we're trying to structure the conversation within our insights organization and really shift that mindset and philosophy.
I have nothing to add. You said
Would
it
you
all.
comment, because when we were discussing earlier, I think you have because of the way the trends of your business with all the M&As, there's a bit of a different dialogue on your side. I'd love for the audience to hear it.
It's a little bit different, but very complementary to what you all have said already. Just the telematics industry is just exploding. There's so much noise. There's so many competitors. It's difficult to know who to listen to and what to listen to. So exactly what they were saying. Gone are the ways of the big surveys, where you think, a lot of screening questions, then you get to the heart of the survey, then you add a lot of demos. We're doing so few of those now that we need partners that understand how, when I say good, bad, or otherwise, I need information within a week, and if it's only 5 questions, let's get it out there and get 5 great answers to as many people, from as many people as we can. And because we're constantly going with our gut here, you've heard the expression fail fast. The leadership team is extremely tolerant of trying things. If they had a bumper sticker, it would be, do it. That's already taken. Just do it. It's such a good
Nobody
one, though,
from
isn't
Nike
it?
in the room. We're all good.
Get going, and also, to your points, it's impossible to do more with the same number of people and hours. So you have to be very comfortable to literally stop doing something in the middle of it, and a lot of people aren't very comfortable with that, and shift and pick something up that has become a top priority literally overnight. Balancing willy-nilly with speed and efficiency and keeping your wits about you is critical in our industry.
So I have a question. I'm
Still
going to go
nothing,
off
Tom?
of our. Oh, you have a point. Go ahead.
Well, yes, now
Now he
that
does.
June's brought it up.
Now he's ready. That's good.
I'm going to turn
so-
the chair. Oh, good. Okay.
So
Perfect.
in our case, then perhaps we're a little different from my colleagues here in that, we're not necessarily facing the kind of reductions or limitations on our resources. Although we are still being asked to do more and to be more efficient, I think we're maybe a little lucky in that we have the ability to do both in a robust way, long-term, large-scale, landscape-type studies. We have actually a whole department that does just that. So we do have that still, while the more tactically targeted research teams are expected, though, to operate at a faster pace and generate, perhaps an incomplete set of insights, but deliver them more quickly and more efficiently and more impactfully. So I guess we have sort of a dichotomy. We have both things happening in our company and I would say throughout our industry.
So I have a question I'll start with you, Michelle. I mean, you might be able to save everybody, but you all work for organizations that are very consumer driven. I mean, I was at the consumer fair, which is the coolest thing I've ever seen. Literally a day with executives celebrating the consumer in California. So you guys don't struggle from there's value here. There's a lot of organizations, potentially some in this room, although I'd say less because it's an innovation conference, but what would be a couple words of advice you'd give to department heads who are struggling to actually get that voice to be able to be a lever that can help drive the business? Because you all are not suffering from that issue.
By department heads, you mean?
There's a VP of Insights in the room who says, that sounds great if only I could get access, if only I had the specific way to sell this in. There's some tips you could give to the audience?
Oof. That's a hard one. Sorry. I think we kind of already talked about it, but gone are the days, as we've already said, of 80-page decks. Nobody wants to see data and research. They want to hear what's the story and what's the so what, and tell me what's the risk of not doing that. I think the biggest thing that's shifting the consumer insights industry, we're not just the voice of the consumer anymore. We're the voice of the consumer, the customer, and the company, and we have to say, this is the right thing for all 3 of those, and this is the risk of not doing that. Here are your options. Let's talk about together what are we going to do, versus it used to be, we recommend doing X, and that X was only what was the best thing for the consumer and nothing else. So I think we're being demanded to be business leaders, strategists, consultants, and not just be the voice of the consumer anymore.
I think that one thing to think about is that even those executives that you're trying to speak to in the C-suite, they're still people, and they still like stories, and they still want to hear that emotional impact. So if you're trying to get them to pay attention to why this is meaningful, walk away from the data a bit and tell that story. And maybe it's a story that's told with data, but I think even more impactfully, like literally show them the consumer, like give them that experience and build that empathy. And we've been exploring using things like VR and other things to create an immersive experience, even if it's just that one N of one person.
Right.
That empathy building really goes a long way at making people understand what that consumer's life is like and really articulating why that's so valuable.
That's so true. We go back to grassroots sometimes on that front. Just, the data show, for instance, with our Hum launch, that a large percentage of those devices were not being used. They weren't activated. So we have a lot of Verizon retail stores around us everywhere. Get out of your office, or I say office, we don't have offices, we have neighborhoods, no walls. Get out of your neighborhood, go into the store and talk to people and find out what's going on. Also collect that voice of the customer, those anecdotal testimonials, small base sizes, but powerful. What we learned was that people didn't realize they had another step in the activation process. It was as simple as that. So we had to create a different messaging and provide simpler instructions and make it a little more streamlined. They thought they were good to go when they walked out of the store. Like, no, it's not magic. It's not there yet.
We like to do consumer immersions with our senior management. I guess not quite so technologically advanced as using VR, but we will bring a representative panel of consumers and have them sit like this on a stage in front of our senior management, and so that they get
stage like this?
Just like this.
Just like this.
Just like this. And so senior management will have a chance to hear directly from the horse's mouth, as it were, but even more importantly, for them in management, they will get the chance to question and address the consumers directly. And we find that often just generates such a higher level of passion for the insights that come out, even if they don't, if they get maybe 2 really insightful answers out of that experience. Just the fact that they had that experience, we find, just elevates the passion for receiving the rest of the insights that we deliver.
So we talked about, at the beginning of this conversation, we talked about everything that we do being a driver of growth, whether it's top or bottom, whether it's a smart acquisition or a failure. We had a pre-call, which obviously you guys would probably expect us to have, and we discussed the term return on investment. And as somebody who works for a tech company, we attribute everything. Christoph's on his phone attributing right now, probably. So we're always attributing what we do to what we make off of it. But we had an interesting discussion about this. So could you guys share with the audience a little bit of what does that mean in your organization? How and if are you quantifying ROI within your company on the insights investments that you spend?
I think we all paused on that question too, didn't we? I thought we
did.
decided we weren't going to raise that question. As ROI, just speaking strictly from my little world is not a problem because of a lot of the other things we've talked about. It's soft. We don't measure it in quantitative spreadsheets and whatnot, but maybe not unlike you, I don't have a resource constraint. What I have is accountability for showing actionable, impactful, cross-functional things that can be done to increase our bottom line and retain customers and grow our business. So as long as I can work collectively with a cross-functional team and show that products have been improved, customers have been retained, or fewer are not falling off, or more are activating, some of those metrics, I'm done. It's the value is, the proof is in the pudding, so to speak.
Yeah, I think, right, we don't have an ROI on research. We have an ROI on the activities we do where insight's built into that. So everywhere from media to innovation to brand renovation, it's our insights that drive those activities. And if those activities are successful, then we're deemed successful. And if they're not successful, then the first question is well, where did that insight come from that made us make that choice? So I do think we get questioned a lot when things go wrong, when we do, look backs to say, what could we have done differently? differently, then insights is probably one of the first places they go to. But ROI is more measured on the output of the activities.
Which makes sense. I mean, what we do is a lens in business. It's not all of it. And I think too often we get crippled by our lens. So that makes perfect sense. So Kristen, talk to me about a breakthrough that Clorox has had, so that you probably could attribute to a consumer insight. And I know, Tom, you have one as well. But Kristen, talk a little bit about that insight and what it's done to the business.
So I think we found a lot of value in a cross-functional team. So I would say that this is driven by insights, but also I want to give credit to the entire team that came up with it. So we have a team called Sense and Respond Marketing, and it includes people from all different functions: brand, insights, analytics, et cetera. And we sort of do test and learn approaches. And through this group, we actually came up with an insight around our Hidden Valley business. The target criteria, the target audience that was being marketed to at the time was really salad eaters, because it's a salad dressing, right? Well, through this dip into the data, we were able to identify as a group of people who was using it in a totally different way. They were dipping other things. Yes, there we go. I didn't realize I'd made that joke. But so people dipping pizza and unhealthy foods into their dressing, and so it kind of created this whole new audience we wanted to go after and market to, and that's been a real growth driver for that business.
Reminds me of college. Tom, you had a great example that you were sharing last week. I'd love for the audience to hear.
Yeah, several years ago, our company engaged in a pro-social initiative. It was called True Dads, and it was designed to encourage fathers to be more involved in the lives of their children. And part of that initiative was a PSA campaign, and this was a topic that wasn't necessarily endemic to what we do at a place in Viacom. That fatherhood, parenthood is not really, not necessarily within our wheelhouse. So we wanted to do some research to sort of ground ourselves in that issue before we went out and tried to build this whole campaign. And so we did this multi-phase research, very qualitative, a lot of in-depth, in-home ethnography work, survey work, and so forth. And from that, we developed insights about how fathers feel about the state of fatherhood today. And through that, we developed this campaign that, rather than being more direct, more along the lines of NBC's "The More You Know" campaign, where they say basically, be more involved in the lives of your kids; they'll appreciate it. We instead went a different route that really sort of resonated with what fathers were feeling today, which was basically that they felt underappreciated for what it is they were doing with their kids, and so that became the heart of our PSA campaign. It was so attractive that we were able to attract sponsorship from companies, co-sponsorship from companies like Campbell's Soup and Jeep and so forth, other companies, family-oriented or family-targeted brands that wanted to be part of our message. So that was a big win for research there.
That's great. So I have one more question for the group, and then I'm going to get you folks involved. So hopefully you have some good questions for the panelists up here. We've spent the last 30 minutes or so talking about how you're impacting growth in your business. We haven't talked a lot about marketing research. We haven't talked a lot about surveys. We haven't really talked about anything tangible. We've talked a lot about business, which has been fun, so thank you. You're staffing departments, right? You're growing. You're trying to think of the right people to bring into the business. Could each of you say 2 traits that you look for when you bring in people to your organization? And then we'll see what the difference is between what I look for from the supplier side, if there is any.
Yeah, sure.
You go.
Yeah, okay. I would say that the 2 ones that come to mind first are, a little bit cliche, but creative, out-of-the-box thinking. Don't necessarily approach the question in the same old way. There's got to be a different answer that can still be a good one. And then the second one is sort of connected to that, and that's that the answer should usually be a collaborative yes to requests. That if you sort of have this can-do, we'll find a solution to that attitude, I think that goes a really long way.
For me, I would say natural curiosity, just having that kind of personality and that disposition to constantly want to understand why, but why. So that sort of personality, that sort of disposition, And then I would then also piggyback on the idea of having the sort of can-do, okay, whatever resources, whatever we have to work with, we'll make something work with it, as opposed to, well, this isn't enough or this isn't what we need. That kind of attitude.
I would say that with the technology that we deal with, the ability to communicate well. I stuttered on that word, didn't I? Whatever. And what I mean by that is a balance between technical savvy and business acumen together. So not just being a research expert or a business expert, but being fluid enough to go between one or the other very quickly is one very important quality. You don't see that too many times. The second one would be just focus. Amidst all the chaos, you've got to stay focused and get some things done and done very, very well. So always keep the objectives in mind. It keeps people from going down these very interesting, fascinating rabbit trails. Work backwards with the sole objective in mind, deliver that first, and then you can go have fun.
Yeah, I'll agree with Tom. And curiosity, I think, is the one trait that sets market researchers apart from other functions. If you don't have curiosity, it's hard to be good at your job. But the other one that I would say is being a good dot connector. So you have to be able to take disparate information, whether it's qualitative, quantitative data, different sources, and be able to see like a beautiful mind, right? See like the patterns in the story within that, and be able to share that out simply.
It's great. It's interesting because I don't even work for a research company. I work for a technology company, and we look for the same types of things. I think a challenge to everybody in this room is how do we market ourselves so that those types of talent want to come work here instead of Google, big tech, what have you. I think we do struggle from a bit of a marketing problem of our trade, so something for us all to debate over the next couple days. I think we have time for a couple questions, I hope, Greg?
Yeah, sure.
How about 3, Greg?
Negotiate.
Greg, well, we'll see what happens. Right in the front.
Hi. A question for all the panelists. Most of you talked about being more efficient and faster, cheaper, maybe better results. And you talked about cutting down on long surveys. And briefly mentioned social media listening. My question is, how do you integrate social media listening analytics into your survey data?
I can take that for a second. So, one way that we're trying to do it is we have things like our brand health tracker, where we actually have an asking component, which is more traditional survey data, and then we have a listening component, which is our online listening data. And we've actually worked to marry up the metrics of both of those so that we can draw a line between them and that they're both using actually the same metrics. What we've found is that sometimes the two move together, and that makes sense, and then other times they don't move together, and usually you can still find a reason that makes sense. So I think we're still exploring it, and we're still trying to sort of figure out how best to use that online listening information in a meaningful way.
Yeah, we're still exploring it as well because in our case, we find that some of our products, our shows, or our brands don't necessarily have a robust online identity and social media identity, and their audiences, that market is not necessarily especially active in social media in some cases, and in some cases quite the opposite. So we're still sort of figuring out where maybe it's on a case-by-case basis, where there's some times where we can bring in the social media learning and integrate it, and other places where we can't necessarily expect to generate much insight out of it.
We use the social media for the extremes more than anything. So when push comes to shove, the classic research, the surveying, those results will trump what some of the social media has said, but it doesn't diminish its value in hearing what people, the more passionate, angry, or super happy people are saying out there. We too have a base size issue, if you will, research term.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to lose my negotiation with Greg. So one more question. I'm admitting defeat proactively, Greg. Right in the middle in the back there. He raised his hand very high. It was good.
He wanted that last one.
I work for an agency that has a very broad customer base that cuts across a lot of industry verticals. And the companies that we see that are doing extremely well in the market right now treat research differently than the vast majority of companies that we work with. They almost go to the point of embedding us. They share a lot of information with us. They bring us in. For 25 years, researchers wanted to be at the top of the table, to be involved in these big decision-making conferences at C-level, and it's finally kind of happening. But the companies that we see that are really, really doing well right now, they're dragging us in to almost to the point like we're embedded journalists in a war or something like that. Do you guys have any active program for more sustained and intense engagement with the research agencies you work with?
I think yes. Well, at Mars, we believe in mutuality, and so we definitely, I think, overinvest in the partner suppliers that we work with by giving them as much information as possible so that you guys can be successful. Where I wouldn't necessarily agree is I think what we were talking about earlier is I think we're less and less having dedicated time to share our insights and more likely to take our insights embedded into cross-functional stories or taking multiple data points. So what I'm seeing is suppliers are less coming to the actual meeting, but we're spending more time on the upfront, sharing and partnering and co-collaborating on what that story is. So I think we invest way more upfront with marketing research suppliers to get to what that story is than we used to, but much less likely to bring them into the actual conversation.
In our case, at least, and it's probably not unusual, uncommon, is that there's an issue of trust, and our senior management, wants to hear from people with whom they've developed, a certain rapport and a certain level of trust, and that's more their internal research teams than it is any external partner. But again, we make it so that the management understands where the insights came from, and they will develop a relationship with the insights, and they will develop a relationship with the process. But when it comes to the actual sort of decision-making process, they keep a sort of a tight sort of circle of counselors, and it's the people that they're closest to internally.
Sorry we're late, Greg. Thank you all.
It was a great panel.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.